Welcome back to another episode of the Supercar Killer M3 presented by Turn 14 Distribution. If you can't tell from this spread of parts in front of me, guess what? We're working on the fuel system today. You could say things are getting kind of serious around here in the fuel department. We have all the hoses and fittings in the world from our friends at Vibrant Performance, including this new Ptfe line that we'll talk about some more once we get to installing it. We also have a bunch of good stuff here from Radium Engineering, including this fuel pressure regulator and filter combo, which lets us convert the whole system over to AN to like a direct fit setup. So very slick. We'll show you more on that soon too. They also have a kit designed to allow you to install a fuel pump in the E46 M3.
Access to the fuel pump is actually relatively simple. You just gotta pull back this rubber flap here, take off the access panel and unplug it, and then take one feed line off of here. And now there's this ring around where you take a hammer, I've already done this, and you just kind of like tap it around to loosen it up. And now we can actually take the whole assembly out. Oh yeah, she's never been out before. There it is. Look at that, quick 5-minute job. Now, I'm sure this is gonna be a bit of a fighter here because I think there's a sending unit as well. There's a bunch of things.
Yeah, and the level.
And the level, yeah, I can see there's...
I think yeah, you kind of have to twist it, turn it, wrestle the Cobra.
Yeah, I see it. I see it. It's slowly coming.
And there you have it. That is the factory fuel pump assembly. See the pump's tucked away here, and this is really the tricky part as far as getting it out of the tank. This was sort of like hooking on the opening there, so a bit of fiddling and she came out. And what we are gonna do obviously is remove the factory pump and swap in this AEM pump. So this is their 340 liter per hour pump, which is, as these green housing ends indicate, is E45 compatible. And at 40 PSI, obviously it's rated 340, but we know that it's capable of handling up to 1,000 horsepower in certain applications, depending on what PSI you run it at and what fuel you're running it on. They actually have really good information here about its capabilities depending on what kind of fuel and pressure you're putting it through. So we know it's going to cover our horsepower needs for this job. And as far as fitting it in that housing goes, turns out Radium Engineering makes a really clever adapter, which is more or less an aluminum sleeve that the pump fits into, and then with this slot here, you can sort of clamp it down. So this adapts this pump to this housing. So I think maybe it's time for Pete to step in here and to make this all work.
Some further disassembly of the pump results in us actually having the whole fuel pump right here. And as you can see, the difference between the aftermarket AEM one and the factory one is it's larger in size, and it's got this little ring that you need for the holder. And that's where the beauty of Radium comes into play here. As Dave said, they've designed this. This will slide right on there. This will clip right into here, and we've got ourselves a plug and play finish. We're also just gonna have to do a slight little wiring modification, but Radium pretty much includes everything. They've got great instructions as well. So this is easy peasy. I'm gonna bolt this in and we're gonna show you the finished product. And there you have it. Our Radium fuel pump kit with our AEM 340 liter per hour pump is installed. Kind of easy, honestly. Radium makes this, as I said, plug and play.
Now that the pump's been upgraded, it's time to address the fuel filter and fuel pressure regulator. This is the OEM setup, which normally there's a metal shield here that covers all this up, which we've obviously removed. We've also disconnected the vacuum and fuel line or feed line to the rail. There's a little relief valve or in the Schrader valve here, which you need to depress to bleed the pressure out of this before you disconnect the fuel line. Otherwise you make a huge mess. Don't ask me how I know that. And this is all going away and being replaced by this beautiful bolt-in or drop-in kit designed for the E46 M3 by Radium Engineering. It is, like all of their stuff, just beautifully constructed, beautifully designed, all out of 6061 aluminum. And the foolproofery that they put into this is really amazing. They label every port so you know exactly where it's going, what its job is. They even label the end caps on the filter housing here. The black end that says inlet, the green end says outlet, so they're color coding it. It's almost like they know I'm their core customer, PT, and they're trying to make this as easy as possible. And as I said, it's designed to bolt directly in place here of the factory stuff. And with an adjustable fuel pressure regulator, obviously you want to have a gauge as well so you can set that accurately. And we're going to want to set our pressure for the 2J and our specifications on this whole system. So that's why we want that. And we're converting this end of it obviously to AN, but the kit does allow you to use the factory feed line if you want. It comes with the correct fitting for that as well. And really where the magic happens is in this filter housing here. They've got 3 filter options that drop into this housing. They have a typical like cellulose paper one that is like an OE style filter, replaceable. So again, you never need to replace the housing, just the filter inside. They also have a micro glass one, which is what we've got. And that is like the latest technology in fuel filtration. It is, I think, rated as 6 microns and has a filtration efficiency of 99.9%, which is kind of like what my IQ is these days, Pete. But it is literally the most efficient fuel filter on the market today. So we got the best of the best going in there. And by the way, that filter is replaceable as well. They also offer a stainless steel filter if you want a washable, reusable filter option, but it's not it doesn't catch as much fine particulate as this one. So this is the most efficient one that we've gone with. And we will show you now how this all bolts in place, but it should be pretty simple. And there you have it, our radium filter and regulators in place, along with our gauge, of course. And it is all gonna fit underneath this OEM shield, which our buddy JP at Stripping Tech powder coated for us. With our regulator and filter in place, it's time to look at building some fuel lines for our system. And for that, I think the most affordable option from Vibrant is to use their normal rubber or synthetic rubber hosing with a push-on style fitting. So we could push that guy in there and connect it to the AN fitting on our regulator there if we wanted to go with this most affordable option. But we are going to go a little bit more baller spec on our fuel lines, and that is going with either their normal flexible race hose, which uses a rubber liner, as you can see here, or we could step up further to their Ptfe lined race hose. And as you can see, the inner diameter is the same. These are both -10 lines, but the rubber line is much bulkier or larger in diameter than this Ptfe line. By the way, the Ptfe liner really has several benefits, one of which is it's very resistant to fuel types that would tend to eat away at the rubber, like E85. So for guys that are running an E85 fuel system, going to the Ptfe is a big advantage. It's also a really good vapor barrier. It doesn't allow any vapors from the fuel to work its way through the way it can with a rubber hose. So if you're running fuel lines through the interior of your car, they highly recommend using Ptfe because you don't want fuel vapors in the cabin with you. The downside to this, though, is that it's less flexible. So it'll kink more easily. That's about as tight a radius as I would want to go before I would be starting to kink the line. Where with the rubber lined hose, you can get a lot more aggressive with it and it doesn't kink. So this gives you some options as far as routing goes, but being bulkier, it may be harder to fit through tight spaces. So I think there's pros and cons to either setup, and it's really going to come down to which design suits your needs better. We're going to go with the Ptfe. I don't think we're going to be running E85 on this, but we do like the fact that it's a good vapor barrier. And I mean, we could certainly run this on E85 or some race gas. So again, this is going to be a better liner for that type of purpose. I should mention, however, that the Ptfe lined hoses require special fittings.
If you guys recall in previous videos, here is what a conventional fitting looks like from Vibrant for -10. And all you would do is slide this over, then put the male piece in and screw this together. And it's a tedious process to a certain extent because you got to make sure you're pushing the hose in and whatnot and to get proper contact. So with the new Ptfe fitting, it's a 3-piece here, and as you can see, there's this little compression fitting here that needs to be inserted into the hose. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is take the other end and slide it over just like that. And now, I've never done this before, so bear with me, but what you wanna do is you need to separate the plastic from the metal braid here, just like that. You just wanna create a little bit of a gap so you can slide this fitting in place. Now that I've peeled this back a little bit more, what I'm gonna do is put this fitting back on and use the butt end of my screwdriver here just to get it to sit on that ridge on the fitting as such. And now we're gonna fit up this piece here, which is gonna be kind of tight too. As you can see now, our compression fitting is flat with a hose end. So I'm gonna take the other side of the hose end and I screw these together. So it's just one extra little step, but I don't think it's that bad, truthfully. They're both equally a little tedious to do, but once you get the hang of it and you've got the right tools, like AN wrenches from Vibrant, then it makes the job much easier. So I'm gonna screw this together. And we're gonna have to get our fuel rail in before we figure out what the length is, because we gotta know the length before I go cutting this and installing the other side.
This is, of course, the factory fuel rail and injector setup, and as you can see, it uses a side feed style injector, which is kind of old-fashioned technology. In fact, it's tough to get these injectors in big boy sizes. So because of that, we are gonna ditch this setup and convert over to this very nice Radium Engineering fuel rail, which is larger bore. I believe the inner bore of this is like 0.69 inches in diameter. So that capacity is big enough to handle pretty much any horsepower you can possibly throw at this motor. And it converts the engine over to a top feed injector, which will allow us to use all the most common injectors on the market in the aftermarket these days, including the ones we'll show you momentarily. As you can see, it's got Radium's logo is nicely laser etched on there. It's got ports on both ends. We've used a Vibrant fitting on this end for the feed line. We've put a Vibrant fitting in the other end to cap it off, though we could put a pressure gauge in there if we had room to do it. It's got two more optional ports on the bottom for different ways to route your fuel in and out. So that's what we're converting over to. For injectors, we've gone with Deechworks. This is the part number for their 1200cc 6-pack. We'll call it a 6-pack PT. I like to order my injectors like I get my beer. And this is the based on a Bosch EV14 injector. So it's a very common size injector, and it will fit right into that rail. I should mention that Deechworks has a huge catalog of direct fit or application specific injectors. It's really one of the things they do best is offer injectors that are specific to the make and model of car that you may be modifying. But they also offer a lot of universal fit ones as well. And I believe this is part of their universal fit top feed line of injectors. They also offer a bunch of other fuel related products. So I should also mention that they give you great data on these injectors. So not only do they come with some flow data here in the box, but if you go to their website, they have a ton of calibration and characterization data on the injectors, which your tuner is going to need. So when it comes time for Sasha to tune this, he'll be able to jump on their website and get all the characterization data that he needs for the injector. And I should also mention that they come with clips. So if we were going to use, say, the factory harness, then we would splice these clips into the harness. Of course, we're going to go to a complete racing harness from our friends at Panic Wire, which you'll see in the future. So
first order of business to get our fuel rail and injectors installed is put these radium adapters into play here, just as so. What's that saying, DP? Never going dry. And I think the same applies here with our Deechworks injectors. We want to make sure that they're lubed up. So what I'm going to do here now is finagle these slowly into place, get all of them lined up, and then they should just pop right in when they're there. Bam! Whew. That is enough fuel rail and injector to make over 1,000 horsepower. We're not going to be shooting for that, but it also certainly looks great. So I think it is finally time we figure out that fuel line. I've mocked up our -10 Ptfe Vibrant hose here, and as you can see, I'm using a nice P-clip here, also from Vibrant, to hold it in place. And I have marked where we're gonna need to cut this thing. So it is time to do exactly that with some of those Vibrant shears. I miss using those.
I know Pete said he was excited to use this tool, but I stole it from him and I'm going for it. Right in the middle?
Right in the middle, right in the middle.
Is that in the middle?
Looks close enough.
Feeling good about it?
Yep.
Here we go. Boom.
Oh yeah.
The tool of power. I love
Sweet.
this thing.
All right, well, let's get a fitting on here, DP.
All right. And there we have it, everyone. Our completed fuel feed line. And I should mention that this end that goes to the fuel rail uses Vibrant's new Ptfe compatible fittings with what they call their full flow bends. So you can see how this bend in it looks kind of bulkier than you would normally see with a typical AN fitting. And that's because the inner diameter of this doesn't neck down at all. It's the same radius throughout the complete bend as the inlet and outlet. So you get no, loss of flow through the fitting, which I think is pretty darn cool. And as far as I know, they're the only company in the world right now making these full flow style bends for Ptfe hosing. So pretty cool to see that. And as far as the diameter goes, this is of course the -10 stuff. And initially we thought maybe we would make the feed line out a -6. And we weren't too sure how to go about sizing the lines. So we actually called our friends at Radium Engineering. We spoke to Aaron there, and he told us that it's more complicated than just choosing the right size line, because the whole other fuel system plays into it. But as a sort of a general rule of thumb, they don't recommend -6 for anything over 600 horsepower. And we're gonna maybe crest that. I think we'd like to make, I don't know, 650 to 700 at the wheel if we can. That's getting into supercar hunting territory. And having spoke to Dove at NV Auto, who run 2Js in a bunch of their cars, Dove recommended going to the -10. Aaron felt like with -8 or -10, we'd be just fine. And this would certainly future-proof us up to, I don't know, maybe 2,000 horsepower. -10 is really pretty big for the amount of power we're going to be making, but there's no real downsides to going to a bigger hose, other than the fact that you add a bit of expense by needing the bigger fittings, which are going to be a little bit more money than a -6 fitting. But at least we know we've got more than enough capacity in this hose. It's never going to be a bottleneck in the system, where had we gone with the -6, we would have always been wondering, are we having to push the pump too hard with a smaller hose? With this, we get less pressure drop. So -10 it is for us on the feed line. And that means I think it's time to move on to building out our oil cooler lines, which we're also going to make with the Vibrant Ptfe hosing and these new Ptfe full flow style hose ends.
It's always satisfying putting together some lines and making this all work. I think we've picked a proper route here. We had to put the sway bar back on. Thankfully, we did that before we started running these lines, because as you saw, straight off, it would have interfered with it. So these nice little 60 bends. Route it perfectly here. We're gonna have to add a little bit of like a rubber hose here so that this doesn't rub through. But otherwise, I think we've got ourselves a very turnkey and easy solution to running an oil cooler setup with AN fittings. So there are a couple of things left, and I think the first one is trying to figure out these coolant hoses, and we'll start with the lower one, which is the easier one. Here we have our Samco Sport silicone hose. This is kind of our go-to for all these high performance applications, and this is from an S54 M3 for the lower rad hose. As you can see, there's just a slight little kink. This is the plastic piece from the stock radiator. So what I'm gonna do is, I think I need to just tilt it just like that to get it lined up. But first I'm gonna cut this hose end off, put this on, and see where we're at. But thankfully this looks like it's gonna be an easy job. I think I may have spoken too soon in terms of this working out. The Samco hose is just a hair too short here, because I'd have to cut it right where it starts turning. And as you can see, the fitting isn't even on all the way there. So this, I don't think is gonna work, which is such a bummer. I do, however, have one other trick up my sleeve, and that means relocating the spout, which is the thermostat housing area. A common issue on these 2Js is that the thermostat housing spout points in a direction that hits a lot of aftermarket turbo manifolds. So Driftworks and a couple other companies have come out with this piece, which rotates it from like this down this way, so it's pointing directly below. And we're gonna fit that up in a second to see if it's gonna help us. However, I forgot that we didn't have an alternator in here. So now we've got an alternator mounted up. which means the idea of being able to run this hose has kind of gone out the window, because I just checked again, and even if we were able to cut this hose and figure it out, it runs right into the alternator, so it's not gonna work. Sadly, it is time to say goodbye to our wonderful Samco Sport hose. It's going back into my stash of hoses, and out comes a Vibrant 90, an aluminum joiner from Vibrant, and a Mishimoto rad hose that I figured out is gonna work here. We're gonna take these 3 pieces, mate them up, and I think we're gonna have ourselves a lower rad hose. It's coming. Just when I had my doubts that this wasn't gonna come together, would you look at this? It is pretty much perfect. This is the exact kind of hose I would like to run, minus the cut of course, but the joiner there is gonna work exceptionally well. So that is done. Up top here, what looks to be like an easy joiner of 2 coolant pipes would be false, actually, because we don't have a filler neck here to fill our coolant with. And I did a bunch of digging, trying to figure out what the best setup is. Some people run an expansion tank, like this is the M3 one, but I don't think there's a way to run this properly and to get coolant effectively into the system with these small little nipples like this. That's not what you want to go for. This is too big. So people have suggested what you do is you build out a swirl pot that goes right here. You kind of cut this off, you put a swirl pot on. Now you've got a good spot, a high spot too, to fill your coolant and bleed it. Or do we just add a filler neck right here? That's also an option. So let us know in the comments. And I think that is almost a wrap. I want to show you guys one last thing, which we're going to install. It's right way in the back there and you can't see it, but it is an Egr Delete. So Radium Auto makes this. It's a simple device. Obviously, it just plugs up your Egr valve, which we're not going to be running. So you can go to their website, check that out. It's something I would recommend doing. It's going to take all those recirculative gases and not put them back into your system. So at DP, I think that is officially a wrap on this episode. It is time for the hot side in a future episode, and I think we are headed to NV Auto for that because, well, for me to try to do a lot of the fabrication work is just gonna take too much time. I don't feel confident welding on this manifold. I don't think I've got a welder that's strong enough for that. So we're gonna leave the hard lifting and work to Vin. I can't wait to see what he comes up with. But as always, thank you for watching. If you like this episode, please give me a thumbs up. Make sure to subscribe if you feel like you want to, and hit that notifications bell.
Look who's here, everybody.
Hello, everyone.
He's not working on the 2J M3 though. He is here working on his own stuff.
That's right.
Building a front mount intercooler for the FD.
Hopefully an update soon when I get stuff done.
He's turned into a fabricator. He's doing aluminum welding. He's building his own end tanks. He's fancy.
That's what the doctor ordered.